Snow slams sideways across a frozen highway rest stop as night turns the world into a wall of white noise. A police German Shepherd stands locked in perfect discipline beside a stranded pickup, paws planted, ears sharp, breath steady in the storm. The officer at the leash squints through ice-cut wind while his radio spits urgent orders to evacuate before the road disappears completely. 30 yards away, a tiny puppy fights the snow near a stalled bus where frustrated travelers lift their phones instead of their hands. Their voices blend into a cold chorus of blame, impatience, and fear. The shepherd does not move without command, yet its eyes never leave the trembling shape sinking inch by inch into the drift. Headlights dim, phone batteries die. The temperature drops like a closing door. Every second stretches thinner. The officer feels protocol pulling one way and conscience pulling the other, while strangers record his hesitation. One word from him could change 2 lives forever. Would you stop or keep driving? Tell us below, and stand with brave canine stories for those who stay when walking away is easier. The highway narrows into a pale tunnel of blowing snow, headlights carving only a few yards of visibility before the wind erases everything again. He keeps both hands steady on the wheel, jaw tight. Eyes fixed forward with the practiced calm of someone who learned long ago that hesitation can be more dangerous than speed. The radio repeats the same advisory in a flat mechanical voice, warning that the mountain pass will close soon, that anyone still on the road is choosing risk. He tells himself he is just passing through. No stops, no involvement, just distance. Beside him, the German Shepherd sits upright without fidgeting, harness secure, gaze shifting with quiet precision from windshield to side mirror to the white blur outside. The dog's breathing is slow and controlled, fogging the air in steady rhythms. It does not whine or paw at the glass, it simply observes, discipline turned into instinct. Years of partnership distilled into silence. Snow thickens until the world becomes texture instead of shape. The lines on the asphalt disappear. Reflective poles flick past like ghosts. Then the first abandoned vehicle appears on the shoulder, half buried already, door slightly open as if someone left in a hurry. He notes it and keeps going. A second car emerges minutes later, then a third, spaced too evenly to feel natural. His fingers tighten on the steering wheel. Patterns were always the first warning sign. Not chaos, order pretending to be chaos. The dog releases a quiet breath, not a growl, not a bark, just a controlled exhale that carries awareness. Its ears angle slightly toward the right side window, waiting. Always waiting for permission. He does not give a command. Not yet. A dim structure materializes ahead through the storm, the outline of a closed rest plaza swallowed by drifting snow. One flickering light pole buzzes overhead, its glow cutting through the blizzard in uneven pulses. He intends to drive past. The plan is simple. Keep moving. Do not get involved. But a brief movement near the edge of the parking area catches his eye, something small struggling against the wind before vanishing again behind a curtain of white. He almost ignores it. His foot eases on the accelerator instead of the brake. Then the dog tilts its head a few degrees, eyes fixed on the same spot, body still perfectly composed. No barking, no sudden motion, just attention sharpened into a point. The shared focus feels heavier than sound. Habit overrides intention. He signals without thinking and guides the truck off the road, tires crunching over frozen gravel. The parking area is nearly empty. Snow skims across the ground like smoke. He steps out into air that burns the lungs on contact. The dog exits on command and moves to heel position immediately, shoulder aligned with his knee despite the chaos of wind. He scans the surroundings and begins to notice details that do not match the storm's randomness. Tire tracks curve away from the main road in deliberate arcs instead of sliding lines. A roadside sign lies broken but not bent, as if struck intentionally rather than by weather. Farther out, a faint shape shifts against the wind, rising and falling unevenly. "Stay," he says quietly. The dog freezes in place. "Watch." The ears angle forward. "Heel." The shepherd closes the small distance again without pulling the leash. Irritation rises in him, a familiar resistance to being pulled into responsibility he chose to leave behind. He had built his life smaller on purpose, quieter, contained. The storm howls around the empty plaza, pressing time thinner with every gust. His phone vibrates with another emergency broadcast announcing imminent closure of the pass. Temperatures are dropping fast, visibility will reach 0. Then the drifting snow parts for a single second, and he sees it clearly. A small puppy collapsing into the white, trying to stand and failing. Its shape almost erased the moment it hits the ground. Delay is no longer inconvenience. Delay is consequence. The wind pushes him toward the stalled bus, where a cluster of figures huddle beneath its dim interior lights. Their silhouettes shift behind fogged windows, phones glowing like small lanterns in their hands. When he approaches, the door folds open with a tired hiss and a wave of warm, stale air spills out, mixed with impatience and fear. Several passengers are already filming through the glass, narrating the storm as if distance makes them observers instead of participants. A woman shakes her head at him the moment he steps into view, her voice sharp enough to cut through the engine's idle rumble. Another man laughs under his breath and lifts his phone higher, zooming in on the dog at his side, as if the shepherd were part of a spectacle rather than a partner. Questions turn into commentary without waiting for answers. Why stop now? Why risk it? Why care about a stray in weather that could bury them all? Someone mutters that people like him are the reason others get stranded. Someone else claims the authorities already issued warnings. Their words blur together into a single cold pressure that feels heavier than the wind outside. He keeps his shoulders squared and his gaze level, refusing to match their tone. The German shepherd stands at heel, leash loose, body aligned with his leg despite the noise. Not a single bark. Not a single step out of place. Discipline in motionless form. Two men push forward from the group, their confidence louder than the storm. They position themselves between him and the drifting snowfield, hands raised not to help but to block. One insists the area ahead is unsafe, that the ground is unstable, that approaching anything beyond the bus is reckless. The other nods in agreement too quickly, repeating the same phrases with rehearsed urgency. Their voices carry the rhythm of authority without the weight of uniform or badge. They do not offer solutions. They offer commands disguised as concern. Leave it, move on. Not your problem. He studies them while pretending to listen. The first detail that settles in his mind is not their words but their gloves. Thick insulated fabric, perfectly dry, free of snow crust or salt stains. Everyone else's hands are red or trembling, sleeves dusted white from brushing against doors and rails. These gloves look new, untouched by the hours the others claim to have been stranded. It is a small inconsistency, almost invisible, but it anchors his suspicion. Patterns again. Order pretending to be accident. Behind him, the shepherd's posture never changes. Ears forward, breathing steady, eyes tracking movement without turning its head. The crowd's volume rises and falls, frustration feeding on itself. A young man steps closer with his camera, narrating the scene with exaggerated commentary, inviting viewers to judge from warmth and distance. Another passenger blames the driver for stopping. Another blames the weather. No one steps into the snow. No one lowers their phone. The pressure builds in layers. Public opinion pressing from one side, the storm from the other. He feels the familiar sensation of being watched, evaluated, reduced to a choice that strangers believe they own. Years ago he learned how easily a crowd can turn hesitation into guilt. The irritation he carried earlier sharpens into focus instead of anger. He shortens the leash slightly without tugging. The shepherd adjusts a half step, perfectly synchronized, still silent. A sudden gasp ripples through the group. All the phones tilt in the same direction at once. Through the shifting veil of snow, the small puppy rises onto its hind legs for a brief second, front paws lifted as if reaching for something that is not there. The wind knocks it sideways almost immediately, its body disappearing into the drift again. The bus interior falls quiet for a heartbeat, the mockery replaced by stunned stillness. Urgency replaces commentary. Even the two men blocking his path hesitate, their rehearsed confidence cracking just enough to reveal uncertainty. The moment passes, but the image remains, small, fragile and running out of time. The brief silence after the puppy's fall does not last. One of the two men recovers first, clapping his hands sharply as if he owns the air inside the bus. He raises his voice and tells everyone to sit down, to stay warm, to let the situation be handled by people who know what they're doing. The second man steps into the aisle and repeats the same message with forced calm, guiding shoulders back toward seats, steering attention away from the windows. Their movements are efficient, almost practiced. Anyone who hesitates is met with a firm look and a reminder that stepping outside could mean frostbite, injury worse. The word, authority, is never spoken, but it hangs in their tone like a badge they expect others to recognize. A few passengers obey immediately, grateful for direction. Others hesitate, glancing toward the drifting snow where the puppy vanished. The men close the distance, narrowing the open space near the door, turning concern into containment. Someone asks if help is coming. One of the men answers too quickly, claiming officials already responded earlier and found nothing, that the area was cleared, that what they saw was probably just wind shaping the snow. The explanation sounds smooth but thin, like paper stretched over a crack. He does not argue. He steps back out into the storm instead, letting the door fold shut behind him. The wind hits harder now, carrying ice grains that sting exposed skin. The parking lot has already changed shape since he arrived, drifts rising where flat ground used to be. He lowers his gaze to the ground and begins to walk slowly along the edge of the lot, boots crunching through thin crusts of ice. It looks like aimless pacing to anyone watching from the bus windows. It is not. His phone appears in his hand almost casually, the motion concealed by his coat. He angles it downward and captures the curve of tire tracks cutting away from the main road at deliberate angles. Another step, another image. He shifts position slightly and photographs the smooth, untouched gloves when one of the men briefly steps outside to scan the horizon. Clean fabric, dry seams, no frost buildup. The camera shutter is muted, the movement small enough to pass as checking messages. Years of routine return without effort. Observe first. Record quietly. Speak later. Behind him the German Shepherd adjusts its stance by a fraction, not a bark, not a lunge. Just a tightening of muscles beneath thick winter fur. A subtle readiness that mirrors the pressure building in the air. The leash remains loose, the dog's eyes tracking the snowfield where the puppy had been. Discipline holds, but alertness sharpens. The storm erases footprints almost as soon as they appear. The narrow path the puppy struggled through moments ago is already filling, edges softening, depth disappearing. Time is not only passing, it is being covered. Voices drift from the bus again, muffled by wind and glass. A few passengers lift their phones higher, zooming in on him now instead of the snow, narrating his movements with detached curiosity. The two men exchange a glance through the window, their expressions tightening when they notice the phone angled toward the ground. One taps the glass, signaling the other. The sense of isolation becomes physical, like standing at the center of a circle that is quietly closing. Another emergency alert vibrates against his palm. Road closure imminent. Visibility approaching zero. The sky above is no longer gray, but a uniform white that flattens distance and depth into the same blank surface. The puppy does not reappear. The drift where it fell swells higher, sculpted by relentless gusts. Every minute reduces the margin for error. Every second narrows the options. He stops walking and looks once more toward the snowfield. The German Shepherd's ears lift, waiting for direction that has not yet been given. The bus door opens briefly behind him, a voice calling out that this is pointless, that nothing is out there, that he is wasting time. The wind steals the rest of the sentence. He kneels, shortens the leash by a measured inch, and meets the dog's steady gaze. Stay. The command is quiet but absolute. The shepherd freezes, paws planted, eyes locked forward. He rises, pockets the phone, and turns toward the open white. Then he takes his first step off the gravel and into the snow. The bus door folds open again, and one of the men steps out with exaggerated urgency, phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice rises above the wind as if he needs an audience more than a response. He paces in a short circle near the entrance, repeating phrases about evacuation orders and restricted zones, glancing toward the passengers to make sure they are listening. The performance is loud, confident, and strangely theatrical. He names departments without giving specifics, nods as if receiving instructions, then turns his body so the screen faces away from everyone. The storm swallows most of his words, but the message is clear enough. Authority has spoken. Leave now. From the snowfield. The sound reaches him in broken fragments carried on gusts. He does not stop walking, but the certainty in the man's tone lands like weight on his shoulders. He imagines the road closing behind him, rescue vehicles turning back, headlines blaming poor judgment instead of quiet necessity. The wind slams into his chest and forces him a half-step backward, boots sliding on a hidden patch of ice. For a brief second the physical push mirrors the internal one. Retreat would be simple. Turn around, get warm. Tell himself he tried. The German Shepherd remains exactly where it was told to stay, but its posture shifts. The head lowers a fraction, ears angling toward the bus, then back toward the open white. A low sound vibrates in its throat, not loud enough to carry far, not aggressive, just a controlled warning shaped by instinct and training. The leash remains slack. The paws do not move. Discipline holds even as unease announces itself in the smallest possible way. The dog is not reacting to noise. It is reacting to something deeper. Something in the air that does not match the surface story. He turns slightly, scanning the lot and the bus windows. The man on the phone continues his performance, nodding, gesturing toward the storm as if the weather itself were confirmation. A few passengers lift their phones again, relieved to have a narrative that excuses inaction. Inside the bus, shoulders relax. Decisions are easier when someone else claims responsibility. The second man steps outside and folds his arms, watching him with a tight expression that looks less like concern and more like calculation. The wind shifts direction and exposes a narrow stretch of ground ahead, revealing shallow impressions in the snow. He moves closer, boots sinking deeper now, each step taking effort. The cold creeps through the seams of his coat and into his ribs. The radio at his shoulder crackles with another alert, the voice flat and indifferent. Road closure imminent, visibility critical. He exhales slowly, watching the breath vanish instantly. The temptation to turn back returns, sharper this time, wrapped in logic instead of fear. No one would question it. No one would blame him for choosing safety. The German Shepherd's low growl comes again, brief and contained, a vibration more than a sound. It does not look at the bus now. Its eyes are fixed ahead, tracking something invisible. The message is not panic, it is assessment. A signal that the situation is changing even if nothing obvious has moved. He acknowledges it with a slight nod, an unspoken agreement that they are reading the same field. He drops to one knee and brushes snow aside with a gloved hand. Beneath the top layer, a pattern emerges. Small paw prints, uneven and scattered, circling the spot where the puppy had fallen. Larger prints overlap them, deeper and more deliberate, forming a loose perimeter that widens and narrows like a breathing ring. The edges are soft from drifting snow, but the intention is unmistakable. These are not random wanderings. These are positions held and adjusted. Guardians, not strays. He traces one of the larger impressions with his fingertip and feels the compacted ice beneath. Recent. Deliberate. Hidden in plain sight by the storm. The realization settles with quiet certainty. The puppy is not alone. Adult dogs are nearby, watching from the white curtain, choosing not to show themselves yet. He rises slowly, eyes scanning the blank horizon that suddenly feels occupied. Behind him, the man's loud call continues, insisting that evacuation is mandatory. Ahead of him, the snowfield holds its silence like a line drawn in air. The wind lifts for a brief second, not stopping but thinning, and the snowfield changes from blank white to layered shapes. What looked like drifting shadows begins to separate into forms with edges and movement. One silhouette steps forward, then another, then three more, each emerging with the same measured caution. Adult German Shepherds, large and steady, appear from the blowing curtain of snow as if the storm itself is releasing them. They do not rush. They do not bark. They spread out in a wide arc, paws placing carefully, eyes fixed not on him but on the ground behind him. Their formation is not random. It is deliberate, almost tactical, each dog holding a position that balances distance and visibility. At the center of the arc, half buried beneath crusted ice, lies the injured mother. Her hind leg is caught in a steel jaw trap hidden beneath the snow, the metal teeth clenched tight around fur and skin. Blood has frozen into dark crystals along the edges, and every shallow breath she takes sends a faint tremor through her ribs. She does not whine. She does not struggle anymore. Exhaustion has replaced panic. The puppy's scattered prints circle her like a small orbit, desperate and unfinished. The adult dogs maintain their ring, bodies angled outward, forming a living wall that has kept her alive through wind and cold. The realization lands heavier than the storm. This is not misfortune. This is intention. The trap is positioned too precisely, concealed too carefully to be accident. Someone set it and left it. The snow did not create this suffering, it only covered it. His irritation from earlier drains away, replaced by a cold clarity that sharpens every sense. Patterns again. Deliberate spacing of vehicles. Clean gloves. Falls authority. The pieces align into something quiet and cruel. Behind him, voices rise from the bus. One of the men steps forward, boots crunching loudly, calling out that approaching wildlife is illegal, that interference can bring charges. The other joins in, layering threats with practiced confidence, insisting that he is violating regulations, that trained officials will handle it later. Their words sound larger than their knowledge, but the volume is meant to intimidate, not inform. A few passengers echo the concern from behind the glass, relieved to have rules to hide behind. For a moment, the men stand taller, bolstered by the crowd's hesitation and the storm's chaos. Authority by repetition. He does not answer them. His attention remains on the ring of dogs. The German shepherd at his side steps forward only when given a subtle cue, stopping just short of the formation. No raised hackles. No lunging. The posture is neutral but alert, a mirror held up to the others. The adult dogs watch the newcomer with focused stillness, reading intent through movement rather than sound. There is no feral panic in their eyes, no reckless aggression. Only assessment. Recognition of discipline meeting discipline. The mother shifts slightly, the metal trap scraping faintly against ice. The smallest sound carries farther than shouting. One of the adult dogs adjusts its position by a single step, tightening the circle, then stills again. The formation holds. It is not chaos. It is structure born from necessity. The German shepherd beside him lowers its head a fraction, ears forward, acknowledging the pattern as something organized rather than wild. A silent agreement passes between animals that have never met, a shared language of restraint and purpose. The wind surges again, blowing snow across the scene and partially veiling the ring. The men behind him continue their warnings, louder now, sensing the moment slipping from their control. They promise fines, consequences, investigations. The words scatter in the air and lose weight before they reach him. The injured mother exhales slowly, frost forming along her whiskers. The puppy's small shape reappears at the edge of the circle, trembling but standing, eyes fixed on him with a fragile expectation that feels less like hope and more like trust already given. He takes one step closer, then another, boots sinking deep. The German shepherd remains perfectly aligned at his side, waiting for the next command without tension. The threats behind him fade into background noise. The storm presses in from all directions, closing the world to a narrow field of white and breath and metal. He understands now that leaving would not return things to balance. It would simply abandon them to the cold machinery already set in place. He straightens his shoulders and moves forward with finality, the decision settling not as impulse but as commitment. Whatever cost waits on the other side of this moment, he accepts it. He is not passing through anymore. He is staying. The wind shifts again and the surface of the snowfield ripples like water. For a second the puppy is visible between the legs of the adult dogs, its small body trembling as it tries to step closer to the injured mother. Then the ground beneath it collapses. A hidden pocket gives way and the puppy drops chest deep into loose powder, scrambling with frantic paws that find no grip. Its head dips below the surface, reappears, then sinks again. The ring of adult shepherds tightens instinctively, but none break formation. They hold position, torn between guarding the mother and reaching the falling shape. The distance between seconds stretches. One more slip and the puppy will vanish completely into the drift. Cold pressure surges through him, sharper than fear, more like a clock slamming shut. The storm steals depth perception, turning every step into guesswork. He feels the margin narrowing to nothing. Behind him the bus lights blur into pale smears. The voices have faded, replaced by the hollow roar of wind filling every open space. Retreat is still possible, but it no longer feels neutral. It feels like choosing silence while something small disappears. He shortens the leash with a precise motion and leans slightly toward his partner. Forward. The command is quiet but firm, shaped by years of shared work. The German shepherd steps ahead with measured control, paws placing carefully despite the shifting surface. There is no rush, no sudden burst of energy. Speed would scatter the formation and trigger panic. Precision is the only safe language here. The adult dogs watch the approach, bodies tense but restrained, reading posture instead of sound. The shepherd lowers its head a fraction and angles its shoulders, offering presence without threat. It moves into the edge of the circle like a door opening rather than a wall pushing in. One of the adult dogs shifts sideways, then another. Not retreating, not surrendering, simply creating space. The shepherd uses its body like a guide rail, stepping between two positions and holding still long enough for the others to adjust. No barking, no snapping, just controlled placement and calm breath, the quiet authority of an animal trained to lead without violence. The ring widens by inches, then by feet. Enough for him to move closer to the trapped mother and the struggling puppy without breaking the fragile trust that holds the group together. He kneels again, this time beside the steel trap, and brushes snow away from the metal with steady hands. The cold bites through his gloves, numbing fingertips, but sensation returns as pain rather than absence. As he clears a wider area, a new mark appears in the ice beside the trap. A fresh chain imprint pressed deep and straight, not weathered, not softened by hours of drifting snow. The link pattern is sharp, recent, deliberate. It cuts across the natural randomness of the storm like a signature. Someone placed this here not long ago. Someone anchored cruelty with intention and walked away expecting the weather to erase the evidence. The realization settles heavier than the wind. The puppy surfaces again with a small gasp of movement, front paws clawing at the powder. One of the adult dogs leans forward but stops short, eyes flicking toward the shepherd for a cue it will not receive. The formation holds, but the tension inside it tightens like wire. He shifts his weight and extends an arm slowly, careful not to startle the circle. Snow slides under his sleeve, freezing against skin, but he keeps his movements deliberate, communicating calm through tempo rather than words. The German shepherd remains a steady line at his side, body angled outward, maintaining the corridor it created. Every adjustment is subtle, a half step, a lowered shoulder, a controlled breath, yet the effect is decisive. The adult dogs continue to yield space without feeling driven back. Cooperation replaces confrontation, and the circle transforms from barrier into perimeter. Trust is not spoken. It is demonstrated in inches. The wind rises with sudden force, lifting sheets of snow that swallow shapes and flatten sound. The bus disappears entirely behind a wall of white. The mountains vanish. Even the dogs blur at the edges. Visibility collapses into a few feet of shifting light and shadow. He blinks against the sting and leans closer to the trapped mother, the chain imprint still sharp in his memory. The storm is no longer background. It is closing in, erasing landmarks, compressing time. Another gust slams across the field, and the world reduces to breath, metal, fur, and white. The storm thickens until even the outlines of the dogs blur into shifting shadows. He leans closer to the steel jaws of the trap, brushing away another layer of snow, when a sudden force grips his shoulder from behind. Fingers clamp hard through his coat and yank him backward, boots skidding across ice. The movement is not accidental. It is sharp, intentional, and fueled by impatience rather than concern. He turns just enough to see the face of the man who had been issuing loud warnings near the bus. Eyes narrowed, jaw tight with the kind of urgency that has nothing to do with safety. "Step away," the man shouts, voice cracking in the wind. "You're making it worse." The words are less instruction than command, and the hand does not release. It tightens, trying to pull him farther from the trapped mother and the struggling puppy. Snow sprays up around their boots as the man plants his feet, attempting to drag him toward the parking lot. The boundary shifts in an instant. This is no longer persuasion or performance, it is interference. The line that had been drawn in air is crossed in flesh and force. He twists his shoulder free with a controlled motion, not violent, just firm enough to break the grip. The man steps forward again, closing distance as if momentum will replace authority. The adult shepherds in the circle react not with chaos but with stillness, bodies locking into alert positions, eyes tracking the sudden change. The injured mother exhales sharply, the metal trap scraping faintly against ice. The puppy's small shape trembles near the edge of the drift. "Stay back," he says, voice steady despite the wind. The words are not loud, but they carry weight because they are anchored in certainty rather than volume. He steps between the man and the dogs, placing his body as a barrier instead of a weapon. The decision settles fully now. There is no remaining space for hesitation. Whatever consequences wait beyond this moment will arrive whether he moves or not. The only choice left is where he stands. The German shepherd shifts forward on command with a smooth, practiced motion, stopping exactly at his side. No barking, no lunging, no flash of teeth. The dog's posture changes just enough to fill the space, head level, shoulders squared, paws planted in the snow like anchors. It does not touch the man. It does not need to. The message is written in stance and gaze alone. This ground is occupied. Advance at your own risk. The leash hangs loose, proof that control is not forced but mutual. The man hesitates for the first time. His breath clouds the air in uneven bursts. confidence thinning as he registers the quiet authority in front of him. Behind the glass of the bus, phones lift again, capturing the tableau from a safe distance. Another figure steps out into the wind, calling the man's name, urging him to return. The storm swallows half the sentence, leaving only fragments that drift like torn paper. He does not look away from the man. The adult shepherds hold their ring, tension balanced on a narrow edge between instinct and discipline. The puppy shifts, slipping slightly, then regains its footing. Snow continues to rise along the trap's edges, threatening to bury the metal again. Time presses in from every direction, not as panic but as compression, squeezing options until only essentials remain. The man takes one small step backward, then another, hands lifting in a gesture that tries to reclaim dignity after losing ground. His voice returns, louder but thinner, promising consequences, investigations, fines. The words scatter into the white and lose shape before they reach their target. The German shepherd remains perfectly still, gaze unwavering, posture unchanged. Presence replaces escalation. Space is asserted without contact. Then, through the layered howl of wind, a distant sound threads into the storm, a siren rising and falling, faint and distorted by distance. It could be help cutting through the mountains, or it could be something else entirely, drawn by the same chaos that hid the trap and the chain. The sound wavers, swallowed and returned by the gusts, impossible to place. He turns his head slightly, listening, while the man freezes and the dogs hold their formation. The siren fades, leaving uncertainty hanging in the air like a question with no answer. The siren returns louder this time, cutting through the storm in broken waves. At first it sounds distant and uncertain, but then a second tone joins it, lower and steadier, and the pattern becomes unmistakable. Headlights bloom through the white curtain at the edge of the parking lot, beams scattering across blowing snow. The sound is not coincidence. Hours earlier, when he first pulled over and his phone struggled for signal, a location ping had slipped through automatically with the emergency alert he acknowledged without thinking. A small digital breadcrumb sent into a network that rarely answers quickly, but almost never ignores a distress marker entirely. Now the response arrives not as rescue theatrics but as procedure. The aggressive man glances toward the lights and then back at the trap, calculation flashing across his face. The confidence he wore like armor begins to crack. He steps sideways, then turns as if to disappear into the storm, choosing distance over confrontation now that witnesses are multiplying. The movement is quick but not quick enough. "Rex," he says, voice calm and precise. "Hold." The German shepherd moves in a single smooth line, closing the gap without a burst of speed or a show of aggression. It reaches the man's arm just as he pivots, jaws securing fabric and sleeve in a controlled grip taught through repetition and restraint. No tearing, no thrashing. The hold is firm but measured, pressure applied exactly where it immobilizes without injury. The man freezes, breath caught between panic and disbelief, realizing the dog is not attacking him but preventing his escape with surgical certainty. When he stops struggling, the grip loosens to a steady contact, a living restraint that needs no force to remain effective. Vehicles roll into the lot one by one, tires crunching over ice, lights sweeping across the scene. Local deputies step out first, movements deliberate, hands visible, voices low but authoritative. Wildlife officers follow, scanning the snowfield with trained eyes that immediately register the steel trap and the chain imprint beside it. A medical rescue unit arrives moments later, doors opening to reveal blankets, stretchers, and insulated cases prepared for both human and animal care. No one runs, no one shouts. The choreography is quiet and practiced, built on protocols rather than drama. He releases the leash slightly and gives a second command. "Easy." The German shepherd disengages from the man's sleeve without hesitation and returns to heel, posture neutral again, as if the decisive moment were simply another step in a long routine. A deputy moves in to secure the man with standard restraints, reading him his rights with words carried thinly by the wind. The second antagonist is guided from the bus by another officer, his earlier confidence replaced by stiff silence. Passengers lower their phones slowly, the shift from spectacle to accountability altering the air inside the vehicle. He pulls out his phone and scrolls through the images he captured earlier, presenting them without flourish. Tire tracks curving away from the road in deliberate arcs. Insulated gloves untouched by hours of exposure. The fresh chain imprint beside the trap, its link pattern sharp against the ice. The wildlife officer kneels to compare the imprint with the chain attached to the steel jaws and nods once, a small confirmation that carries more weight than a speech. Travelers step forward with their own recordings, angles from the bus windows showing the men issuing false authority, attempting to redirect the crowd, and grabbing his shoulder. Evidence layers over evidence, each piece modest on its own but undeniable together. Questions are asked and answered calmly. Names are taken. Times are logged. The deputies coordinate with the wildlife officers, establishing jurisdiction without friction. The medical team moves toward the injured mother with insulated tools, speaking softly while assessing circulation and preparing to release the trap. A thermal blanket is draped around the puppy, its trembling slowing as warmth replaces shock. The entire scene unfolds with the steady rhythm of procedure, not the rush of heroics. His past becomes visible not through declarations but through the way he stands, the clarity of his statements, the sequence in which he offers information. He does not raise his voice. He does not embellish. He answers only what is asked and anticipates what will be needed next. The deputies exchange a brief glance that reads like recognition, not of rank but of familiarity with discipline and investigative patience. Respect forms quietly, built from competence rather than introduction. The steel trap is opened with controlled pressure and careful leverage. The mother exhales sharply as the jaws release, and the medical team moves in with practiced gentleness. The adult German shepherds watch from their ring, tension easing but not dissolving, eyes tracking every motion. When the injured leg is stabilized and the puppy is secured in warm fabric, the circle loosens by degrees. No one commands them. No one approaches them directly. Trust shifts the perimeter outward until space exists where there had been none. Consequences are spoken in measured terms. Charges related to animal cruelty, unlawful trapping, and obstruction are documented on tablets that glow pale blue in the storm. The men are placed into vehicles with procedures followed step by step. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. Witnesses sign digital statements. Chain of custody begins the moment the trap is bagged and labeled. Justice arrives not as a dramatic verdict but as a sequence of small, irreversible actions. When the immediate work settles into quieter tasks, he steps closer to the injured mother, stopping at a respectful distance. The German shepherd mirrors him, head lowered slightly, breath steady. One of the adult dogs shifts aside, then another, opening a narrow path without surrendering vigilance. It is not submission. It is acknowledgement, a silent agreement that intent has been proven through action. He kneels slowly, letting the moment remain wordless. Snow continues to fall, but the storm no longer feels like a wall. It feels like a background again, something that can be worked within rather than fought against. The storm does not end all at once. It loosens its grip gradually, wind dropping from a roar to a steady rush, then to a distant hum that no longer shakes the ground. Snow continues to fall, but it settles instead of striking. The parking lot transforms from battlefield to quiet landscape, lights reflecting softly off fresh layers that erase the harsh edges left behind. Vehicles idle with open doors, radios murmur, and the urgency that filled every movement earlier gives way to calm procedure and quiet breathing. The injured mother is lifted carefully onto a padded stretcher designed for animal transport. Her leg is stabilized, wrapped in insulated material, and secured with gentle precision. She does not resist. Exhaustion has softened her fear, and the presence of steady hands replaces the cold certainty she endured for hours. The puppy is placed beside her in a thermal carrier, its small body finally still as warmth seeps through trembling muscles. The adult shepherds watch from a distance, their formation no longer tight but still protective, eyes following every motion without panic. One by one, animal welfare officers guide them into safe enclosures, speaking low and moving slowly, treating them not as threats but as guardians who did their duty too long without help. Over the following days, arrangements unfold with the same measured realism as the rescue. The mother receives veterinary care and begins a slow recovery. The steel wound cleaned and monitored until weight returns to her step. The puppies are relocated to experienced foster homes where routines replace fear and regular meals replace desperation. The adult dogs are evaluated, then adopted by handlers and families prepared for their discipline and intelligence. Nothing happens instantly. There are forms, checks, visits, and careful decisions. Healing becomes a process instead of a promise. The rest stop returns to silence once the last emergency vehicle leaves. The bus is towed, the broken sign cleared, and the chain of custody continues in offices far from the mountain pass. What remains is fresh snow and faint tire impressions that will soon disappear entirely. He stands beside his truck, breath visible in the softened air, feeling the weight of the night settle into memory rather than tension. The German Shepherd steps closer without command and leans gently, resting its head against his knee. No urgency, no alert posture. Just quiet presence shared between two beings who understand each other without needing sound. He lowers a hand to the dog's neck, fingers brushing through thick fur warmed by movement and trust. The storm that once pressed from every side now drifts downward like a curtain closing slowly instead of slamming shut. There is no applause. No crowd remains to narrate the ending. The respect earned is not spoken aloud. It exists in the small gestures left behind. A path opened without fear. A grip released without injury. A circle widened without command. The world resumes its ordinary rhythm, but something within him has shifted back into place, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to feel aligned again. Responsibility no longer feels like a burden he escaped. It feels like a choice he recognized. The bravest decision is not the loud rescue, but the quiet choice to stay when leaving would have been easier.